Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you very much for joining this virtual event from NICE in a series of events that we've been holding over the last couple of weeks, in which we talk about our response to COVID, and we have taken various angles. Today we'll be looking at the life sciences offer and learning from COVID. My name is Meindert Boysen. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive of NICE and the Director of the Center for Health Technology Evaluation. Today we'll be hearing from experts, speakers, as you see them here on the slide, and they will all be addressing the continued collaboration and interaction between various agencies in the health service to together respond to this really complex and difficult times with COVID. Each of the speakers will speak from their own perspective about how their organization or the group they represent have been working with us and with others to overcome the various challenges. We are having a Q&A session at the end of these presentations of the three speakers. And feel free to submit any questions you have via the Q&A function and we'll pick them up. We can't promise that we get to them all. Often we receive so many questions that within the hour we will not be able to answer them all, but rest assured that we will hear your comments and we will read about them and learn from them. We'll also be recording the event. It's important that you recognize and realize that. I will give a very brief introduction into NICE's life sciences offer. And it's really very brief because I want the three speakers to have the time to make their presentations. So if we go to the next slide, this describes in a very, very top line level how we believe we interact and work with industry. And industry is really the life sciences industry, the focus of today's conversation. And we depict this as a pathway mimicking the development of technologies, and they can be drugs, devices, diagnostics, and digital technologies even. And the development pathway goes over a number of stages, as many of you know, often related to the evidence generation, as you see here referred to at the bottom of the slide. Clinical trials, other evidence development. That is important for us because we use that evidence in the evaluation, as you see next or at the bottom, to create a bridge from evidence into decision making. And of course, once we've made a decision about a technology, and it can be a decision about their clinical effectiveness and cost effectiveness, but it could also be about their safety and efficacy when it concerns interventional procedures. Once we've made a decision, of course, there's then adoption into the NHS. And all those processes require some degree of hand-holding, if you will. And we describe our Office for Market Access as one of those tools NICE has to help those that are interested in the development pathway from bench to bed. And how NICE can help you if you're in a life sciences company, but also others that are interested in understanding how this works along the way. At the top of the slide, you see the reference of NICE Scientific Advice, which is an important program that helps companies and interested parties, including patient organizations, understand what kind of evidence is required. And of course, there are things not on this slide that also concern our life sciences offer, particularly where it concerns the commercial and managed access support we provide to our colleagues in NHS England. So it's a comprehensive offer, we think, and it really relies heavily on collaboration with our key partners in the NHS. And today's webinar, in the context of COVID, will really be all about collaboration. You'll hear that from each of the speakers in different ways. But it will also be about what we expect from evidence and how we respond to it and how we change our processes to meet the demands of those that use our guidance. We cannot stay as we are. I think you've heard that many times over the last months. So without further ado, I would like to move on to our first speaker, Carla Deakin. She is a program director in our Center for Health Technology Evaluation. She looks after commercial and managed access, which includes the Accelerated Access Collaborative. And from that perspective, she'll be talking about the rapid response to COVID-19 from a technology perspective. Over to Carla.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Minder, and hello, everybody. So I'm going to just take a short journey really to describe what we've been doing and one of the key responses that we've had to the COVID situation. So just to start off, and with a marketing background myself, I always like to tell a story. So I always like to start at the beginning. So if what you see here on the slide in front of you is a very stylized view, if you like, of the technology development to adoption pathway. Now, obviously, this is framed in terms of medicines here, but there's many common aspects of this across all types of technologies. And what this is just showing that there is a pathway, there is a path that we follow, there are a series of things that we do within NICE, and we interact with other system partners and with companies to get those technologies from their development into patient access. Now, the thing is, it's always evolving. So at the bottom, you can see a couple of, or 2 or 3 things that are really spurred us on. So as Minder mentioned, I have responsibility for the Accelerated Access Collaborative Secretariat. So the Accelerated Access Collaborative has done a lot to shape not just what NICE is developing and doing, but what the whole pathway is looking at. We then have the upcoming end of the transition period. So the EU exit situation, again, has really put the impetus into the system to have a think about how we're doing things. But really the one we're interested in today is some of these were expected, shall we say. The one that really wasn't expected and arrived very, very quickly on our doorstep is our friend coronavirus or COVID-19. So what I want to do is just talk to you a little bit about what that's meant for us in NICE. So next slide, please, Victoria. So this has been about something called Rapid C19. So you'll see that stands for Research to Access Pathway for Investigational Drugs for COVID-19. And for those of you who aren't aware of it, essentially, as it says here, it's a multi-agency initiative that's allowing us to try and draw and pull on those technologies that are going through trials at the very, very fastest pace we possibly can, given that we're in a pandemic situation, and every day, every minute we can shave off what we do is hugely important in helping treat patients here and now. So who's in that? So it's a collaboration, I suppose you would say, of the usual suspects. And if you think back to the pathway I've just showed you, it gives a very, very good insight to that. So if you like, the core members or the initial members who we started with were ourselves in NICE, our colleagues in NHS England and Improvement Specialised Commissioning, colleagues from the MHRA, and we'll be hearing from Krishna a little later, but also colleagues in the NIHR. So this was the core group that came together. But what's happened over the time, and if we talk about this, we first started thinking about this idea probably about the second week of April, and by 2 weeks later, we'd convened a group, we'd got a process, an outline process running, and we'd started working collaboratively to review what was going on. And that group has really cemented itself and has gained extra participants. So as you'll see here, we have colleagues from the Scottish Medicines Consortium who joined the group, colleagues from Wales, from the AWTTC in Wales, and colleagues from Northern Ireland. And also, very importantly, we've developed a very, very strong link with the Department of Health and Social Care, particularly through the Therapeutics Task Force. And I think it's fair to say now that Rapid C19 is fairly hard-baked into the system response from a governmental point of view. So it's been a very, very successful enterprise from that point of view. So that's a little bit about the what and the who. So I think if we move to the next slide, let's talk a little bit about the, how we actually doing this. What's the how, the where, and the when? So this is quite a busy slide. I'm probably going to spend 2 or 3 minutes on this slide. So just to say, what you see on the right-hand side there is a very simplified process map. Now, any of you have had a chance to have a look at the process guide to the Rapid C19 initiative, which sits on the NICE website. You'll see this at the end of the process guide. So this tells you as best we can what we're doing and who is doing it in that time. So I think the question might be, actually, just to start with, it might be a question to the audience to think, well, why is NICE talking about this, and why aren't all the other organisations all lined up together? Well, I think the point is that we are collaborating, so we are trying to use as much as our group traction to help us do that. And the thing that NICE was able to provide when, in the very early days, when Minder was discussing with James Palmer at NHS England, what could we actually do here to help, is the fact that the skills that in NICE are around evidence critique and synthesis, and also around structured decision making. So it made NICE a very, very helpful glue, if you like, to bring and build all the bits of the process together, because that's where we find ourselves very often as an organisation. We're sort of at a pivotal point in that access pathway, which means we have the relationships and the understanding with all the other partners in the sequence, if you like. So that's why we looked at doing this, and also the fact that we had the resource for the Accelerated Access Collaborative Secretariat available due to obviously cessation of AAC work in the face of the pandemic. So that's a little bit about why CTAS Co-ordinated. And I do apologise if you can hear my dogs barking in the background. So what actually happens in here? So there's sort of 4 key stages, if you like. So the first stage is about, as we see here, the horizon scanning, and we call it stratification and enrichment. And what that's really about is utilising a sort of a centralised horizon scanning approach. And it's about us getting to one version of the truth for all the organisations to work from, so that we can do things cohesively and in a very, very organised manner. So that's our colleagues from the the MHRA Innovation Observatory do what they do superbly here. They are scanning the horizon. They are all the time looking at every trial ongoing for COVID therapies worldwide. So they're doing that routinely, and twice a week what they are doing for us is applying a set of criteria which have been developed by the group members, by the Rapid C19 group members, to help us prioritise, or perhaps to choose words that you might hear elsewhere, to try and see where the horses are running, what's looking like something that's really, really promising here. So doing that work for us, that work there, that list on twice a week gets passed to the group in NICE, who starts to enrich that. And that's about really going into what we see there, finding out about what trials, pulling the information together on the trials that we see on those trial trackers, and enriching, speaking to companies where companies involved, but building up more information. And that allows 2 things. It allows us to produce a briefing and something called a rapid action plan. And the importance of those is that they then go to an oversight group. So this is a group that is considered, it consists of the organisations that you've just heard me talk about on the previous slide, and on a weekly basis. So we have the 5 o'clock on a Wednesday night is when we all get together for an hour and a half, and we look at briefings and we look at new information on topics and try and understand how to put some action plans together, such that the first moment we get a signal that indicates that an action can be taken, and there's a real opportunity here to actually have a technology that can be given to patients to help in this current terrible situation we find ourselves in. We're ready to do that. So in that, if you like, that go, no go, if you want to see it as that way, there's a couple of things we have to think about. Then so our colleagues at the MHRA are absolutely critical at this part, understanding the regulatory signal. And the reason we use those words is it might not be the traditional licensing route that can be used in this situation because we're moving rapidly. So we're looking at the regulatory channels that are available at that point in time to safely deliver those technologies out to patients. And also from colleagues in NHS England are looking from a commissioning perspective at that point in time, what they need to do and I think many of you will have seen the CAS alerts that go out, to put those together with colleagues from the MHRA and assistants from NICE with our prescribing briefs to actually give the signal, so those frontline clinicians who are working in these very, very difficult conditions are extremely clear about what it is this technology can do for them, how it should be applied. and where the challenges might be. So that's what this looks like at that point. Now, the sort of end of that, and why we have this sort of fourth bucket, if you like, of licensing and guidance, was, as we've just said, it might be that there is subsequent to patient access in this pandemic situation. There are further aspects of licensing that need to be pursued. And likewise, we aren't doing any health technology evaluation in this process at this point in time, because it's having to happen very, very quickly. So we are thinking about the signals that we and the information that we have that helps inform the broader system response. But then obviously we have to think about guidance later. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is just an example I wanted you to see, because this is a great example of collaboration. So this is an output that NICE has developed, if you like, in concert with NHS England and other colleagues, that's part of that piece to actually help clinicians. So you see here the corticosteroids briefing, which was about helping clinicians understand. I draw your attention to the sort of fourth picture there. This was us trying to find a way to help the frontline clinicians in these very difficult circumstances understand what this was about, what the results were about, and what it meant for them in practice. Okay, next slide, please, Victoria. Okay, so more importantly, what have we learned? Well, you might say, yes, the first point there is probably, you know, didn't we all know that before? And you're absolutely right. The innovation and pathway can be considerably shortened if we can all pull together and collaborate. But what's been different here is having that very, very clear shared common objective. So this is the pandemic really, really focusing our minds on what needs to be done here. And that's allowed us to work together in a way to cross some of the bridges that perhaps prior to this situation were not quite as easy for us to sort of bridge across. Key in this has been the regular structured communications and the interactions. So I mentioned the oversight group meeting, which is a sort of star at the centre of our wheel on the week, if you like, of Rapid C19, where everybody comes together at the same time, hears the same things. And more importantly, to the third bullet point there, share the relevant information. So as an example, some of your companies may have experienced a call where all of us have been in the room at the same time, all the agencies under the Rapid C19 banner. That is something that would not have happened in previous situations, but it's been brought to us by the need to move quickly. But we've learned there is some real value in doing that. So how are we taking this forward? So particularly, if you like, the horizon scanning piece that we talked about, this was built on the foundations of the work that the AAC was starting to do, but we've had a chance to really live pilot this out in this contained therapeutic area. And we've learned so much in this that we can feed back into that continued development of a centralized horizon scanning system to help companies, help the system, and help patients get technologies as quickly as possible. And very importantly, it's really, really strengthened our understanding, our relationships. And we now all know each other, as you might well expect, much, much better than we did before. And it's those things that really, really help us as we move forward with other initiatives. So just to mention here, many of you are aware of the MHRA Innovative Licensing and Access Pathway. What we learned from Rapid C19 was the way to talk to each other, to underpin these types of initiatives going forward. So it's been a massively positive experience. So I could move to the final slide. So we've talked about Rapid C19, but there's been lots of other things we've done. And what you can see on this slide is a collection of those. So you'll see that we've developed some sets of evidence standards. So going back to thinking about Mindert's original slide, collecting the right information. How do we help people do that? So we put together one for COVID-19. And importantly, again, that was in collaboration with colleagues at the NIHR. So it's a joint badged piece. You see some of your medical technologies. You can see obviously scientific advice has been working there, and also a little piece about our rapid guideline program. So as you can see, we've done an awful lot. So I think I've very much filled my 10 minutes there, and I hope that's given you a real insight into what we've done. I'm going to pass back to Mindert.
Well done, Carla. Very, very interesting stuff, and a great achievement. of the NICE team and all those people collaborating across the 4 nations. It's very interesting to see. I think that's a first, isn't it, to work so closely together. I guess we already work together very closely in regulation, and that's a good bridge to our next speaker, Dr. Krishna Prasad from the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, who will give us an insight in applying what they've learned from COVID to an innovative regulatory system after leaving the EU. Krishna, over to you.
Thank you very much, Minder and Carla, and NICE colleagues for inviting me to speak at this event. On behalf of MHRA and its learnings from the recent experience. Over the next 10 minutes or so, I'll highlight some of the main points that MHRA have noted and the potential for establishing an innovative regulatory system based on the fact that what Carla has mentioned so far and discussed very nicely, the issues about collaborative effort. Excuse me. Next, what have we learned so far in terms of the experience with COVID is the fact that it has brought forth a number of aspects for MHRA for various reasons. The crucial component has been for us to have a rapid review of all our activities. That includes clinical trials, new license applications, and repurposing of existing products, and handling supply aspects. That required, which industry will understand, about variations to the existing licenses, be it manufacturing or quality control or emergency supplies. The situation primarily demanded a risk proportionate assessment in the context of COVID. And as the previous speakers have alluded to, our practice has been to take our time, look at the data, and critically evaluate what is required and establish the safety and efficacy. However, we have had to do this in the shortest of time possible, as well as integrate with the wider health system to ensure that the delivery is appropriate. In achieving this, we have had to stand up and commission the new expert groups that provide us the basis for maintaining an independent scientific scrutiny while maximizing the collaboration. And as you can imagine, the independent scrutiny is essential to establish safety and efficacy in the context of the increasing demand for many of the products. Next slide, please. I'll give you an example. For clinical trials authorizations, we've had to combine rapid approvals, but also support the novel clinical trials initiative. And there is a demand which occupies 2 different areas. One is to achieve rapidly all the clinical trial approvals, but also simultaneously maintain the ongoing clinical trials for all the other diseases. And the rapid approvals focused on the COVID-19 related products. Just to give you an example of how the approval times have changed over the years, you will see that the combination of approaches meant that the COVID approval times were much, much faster. And the agency prioritized these applications as a public health response. And you will see that the COVID-19 clinical trial approvals was nearly half of what was previously achieved in the previous 2 years. It should be noted that the times for 2019 and 2020 were time from first to initial opinion, and then whilst in comparison, the COVID-19 response has been to the final approval, which meant that we have initiated the process and carried through very rapidly all of the processes. So far, at the last count, nearly 75 trials have been approved, and the timelines ranging from 1 to 20 days, with an average of 9 days. Simultaneously, we've had to put out guidances for maintaining the ongoing clinical trials for other conditions, and that has been achieved through the MedRegs blogs, which the MHRA have issued, and also through communications and collaboration with the stakeholders in industry. Next slide, please. So what has the agency learned from the cycle of COVID-19? If I were to put this together as a learning cycle for COVID-19, you will see at the top, it's the agency's priorities are the patients and public health. This is only essentially a snapshot, and you will see that this goes through the cycles of developing products, with supporting innovation, providing new regulatory products and tools and pathways, establishing fluent and efficient processes for regulatory flexibilities and new ways of working, establishing partnerships right across the government, and as Mahendra mentioned earlier, across the devolved nations and as a whole, initiating and maintaining collaboration with international agencies, as well as trialists and trial groups, and then subsequently planning, focusing on prevention and long-term change, whilst we anticipate that what treatments we will approve the licensing process right now might offer us some advantages. At the current point in time, we still have to think about how we will manage the subsequent and future processes. We have strengthened our interactions with partnerships across the government, and as very nicely alluded to by Carla, it has been across agency work, and I'll refer to in a minute. Next slide, please. We've had to introduce regulatory flexibilities in order to maintain supplies, and I highlight some of the points in here. And this was essentially to enable industry to maintain supply of crucial medicines. And this has been challenging because of the combination of the pandemic, as well as the issues surrounding arrangements for leaving European Union and maintaining self-sufficiency. This has required frequent and liaisons at short notice with healthcare partners, with industry, as well as various divisions and centers within the agency. The example of vaccine comes to mind, where the licensing, the pharmacovigilance, and the NIBSC have all had to coordinate their activities in order to ensure that these are taken forward. And another example is the remdesivir, which went through some months ago. There are lessons learned from this regulatory flexibilities, and for industry, one thing I would like to highlight is that you need to contact MHRA. An early notification to MHRA and a frequent contact with us would be of great help in finding a regulatory solution. This may not be exactly what we had thought of at the start, but we will develop the process and we will find a solution. The opportunity, some will call it a challenge for the future, is to find that we do this very efficiently and in a low burdensome way, which will require some changes to the guidelines and requirements, and we are looking at that. Next slide, please. The slide highlights slightly different way what has already been said about the multiple partnerships and coordinations and a multi-agency coordinated initiative of Rapid C19 and the oversight group. And in my personal view, the Rapid C19 oversight group and the workings are an exemplar of the way that we can work at responding rapidly to the demands which are placed on all of us. And that includes various sections of the MHRA. And this will be the heart of any success for the future. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all the agencies involved, nice colleagues, to thank for their willingness to facilitate this and also ensure that the regulatory standards are met. Next slide, please. We heard about early access to medicines and as a part of the regulatory process and MHRA's initiatives. And you will be aware that this has been a scheme which is in existence for about 5.5 years, operated by the MHRA. There were set timelines for this in the processes. However, the pandemic has given us a new meaning and a dimension to this. I've listed with some of the points that we have learned, thanks to Dan O'Connor, some of the aspects and we think are significant and that are achieved through the Rapid 19 collaboration. The delivery of even early access medicines requires a very coordinated effort on the part of the getting approval, getting the scientific opinion, and communicating this through the various other healthcare partners, including NICE and NHS, and the devolved administrations. What we have achieved so far in currently is a coordinated effort in starting the process with the company, including the company meetings, and establishing the direction that the company would take and how to achieve the rapid turnaround of any of their applications. We have also developed different ways of working and a rapid assessment process, which I'm pleased to say that the remdesivir example is a good one, in that we processed this application through in about 3 weeks. And it also achieved to get ahead of our own European partners who were looking at a rolling review process, so that it became available to the patients 2 weeks before Europe. This has also set a platform for an end-to-end collaboration, and this is in double quick time, if I were to use an American expression, which facilitates multi-stakeholder discussions right across the healthcare sector. Next slide, please. So what does MHRA look for in the future of the working? I think we anticipate that we'll be looking at a life cycle regulatory approach, and there are 4 key shifts which come for MHRA. I've borrowed this slide from Dr. June Rain, who talked about this in a few weeks earlier, and that we're intending, or our intention is to turn from a controller to an enabler, which is the significant change. And we will need to continue the global voice influencing our regulatory partners right across the globe. We have to adapt a patient champion approach and then to a system partner. These could be seen as major shifts in the agency, but these seeds have already been sown and it is happening. Engagement and being a global voice is a high priority, and I'll talk about this in a minute in the next slides. All of these do take a lot of effort to make that streamlined, and the agency is ready for this change to happen. Next slide, please. So, in the transformed future, we are looking at supporting innovative products which are of high interest. And the 3 main areas, if you like, are the digital transformations, genomics and gene therapy, as well as diagnostic development, enabling the UK PLC to achieve its maximum potential. There is a big interest in the agency about novel clinical trial design and the new processes and the linked systems that are essential if we were to anticipate delivering a transformed regulatory service and an innovative regulatory process. We have to learn to maximize the use of real-world evidence and patient engagement, which is our intention to take forward. I will just point out the potential of this in a snapshot of what an innovative regulatory process might look like in the next slide. Next slide, please. This is a bird's eye view of the process that's being developed and finalized as we speak, where it offers an identification of innovative medicines very early, development of a target profile, and maximizing the use of the regulatory toolkits that are currently available and are being developed. Working with partners right across the healthcare system, as you will see. Apologies, this print might be a bit small, but these will be available for subsequent viewing. The pathway includes many of the features that I've mentioned in the earlier slides, and you will see that it prioritizes patient needs and a healthcare system alignment. Next slide, please. So, in summary, the COVID-19 has facilitated, has facilitated our collaborations and also international interactions. It has strengthened the existing partnerships, including establishing the ICMRA, ICMRA for short. It's an international collaboration of medical regulatory authorities, where developments relating to COVID and others are debated, and these are facilitate a global regulatory actions as necessary and exchange of ideas. The MHRA has developed link evaluations and pharmacovigilance aspects. We are participating in the FDA-led Orbis project for anti-cancer products as a collaborative effort. And this is apart from the collaborations ongoing in relation to COVID-19 pandemic itself. We have also agreed to participate in the Access Consortium. So, next slide, please. So in summary, COVID-19 has facilitated learnings, aiding development of efficient regulatory process and interaction with multiple healthcare partners, and to reduce redundant practices. The effective partnerships and collaborations from end-to-end process, the product development and delivery, and a new licensing pathway. We hope to see that MHRA being a key enabler in the innovative system, including development of regulatory science. Thank you very much, Minded.
No, thank you, Krishna. Very, very comprehensive and insightful description of your learning, and you kept the best to the last around the new pathway. And I know there have been already some questions about the learning translating in a more sustainable way of working together. And so it's great that you've given some key insights. So thank you very much for your time. I know with everything that's happening today, even around COVID, there's never a minute of quiet in your life, and it's great that you were able to make the time. I forgot to introduce you proper, so I'll just say that you're the group manager, assessor, and principal assessor to the Committee for Human Medicines, and you're a consultant cardiologist and work in the licensing division of MHRA. Apologies, I didn't do all that. But let's move over to Eric Lowe. We're slightly behind schedule, Eric. You always know when you're last, you have to catch up, but I'm sure you'll be very good at making some very top line points around this topic. You are an independent consultant. We know you very well. We've seen you in many ways interacting with NICE. This time, this is your personal view. We positioned you a bit like an industry, someone with an industry perspective, but I think you'll be here as Eric. So welcome very much to the event, and over to you.
Thank you, Minder. I'm a very strong advocate for patients and industry. So thanks for the invite to take part. It's always a great pleasure. So we can move to the next slide, please. And I'll try and be very quick. So one of the biggest challenges facing all stakeholders, I guess, involved in HTA is the disconnect between the data needs of the regulatory bodies and the different HTA impair archetypes. And most often trials and evidence generation programs are very focused on regulatory approval. And this is true across the board, particularly in rare diseases, but even in oncology, where we see earlier and earlier approval of new treatments, most often phase 2 single-arm studies with very small numbers of patients and very, very limited follow-up of patients, because there's such a speed to get to market. And I think there are similar and also unique problems with diagnostics and devices too. And this is a big, big challenge for everybody. So if we go to the next slide, please. So as a consequence, this presents, I would say, significant challenges to downstream decision makers, I guess not just in an HTA context, but also a payer context, but also in the clinic, where patients and clinicians need to make very difficult decisions about treatment options based on often very, very limited evidence. And these decision makers need to take account of many other aspects other than just safety and efficacy. And I guess the challenge is because although we work in a system, the system is made up of silos, and I think that's been alluded to several times today, which means that the inputs into that system aren't appropriate. And if the inputs into different parts and components of the system aren't appropriate, then the system struggles actually to generate outcomes. It can get outputs, but not easily outcomes. And when we do get stuff out the other end, it's often suboptimal. And there are different consequences of system outputs to different stakeholders. But in the context of patients, what it often means is that we have consequential therapeutic treatment pathways rather than state-of-the-art treatment pathways, because the outputs of the system aren't perfect, and they will never be perfect, but they could be more perfect. And when we start to put these together in treatment pathways, it all looks a bit suboptimal. And as a consequence, I think health systems, therefore, are much more likely to buy costs than they are outcomes. So if we go to the next slide, please. So this is partly because I think that, you know, and Carla and others have alluded to this, is the lack of, until COVID at least, the lack of a unifying goal. So we work in a system, it's a very long system with many, many different stakeholders, in which the vested interests and the incentives and rewards are very rarely aligned around this common goal. And without the right guardrails, this means it often feels like a feeding frenzy in the context of clinical research, where the clinical rationale and plausibility of the research somewhat goes out the window. And we see a plethora of activity in PD1 or in a particular pathway, or in this case, COVID, but without really stepping back and thinking about what is the objective, what is the focus, how do we take account of the entire system, rather than just rushing around a little bit like headless chickens, investing gazillions of dollars and pounds and euros into research that may not be rational or plausible for the real world. So if we go to the next slide, please. I'm conscious that I need to speed up a little bit. So as a consequence, and I think as a consequence of that, I think what we get is an innovation gap, which is the disconnect between the incredible levels of investment in money and people and time and patients' lives actually into research, and what we get out the other side is marginal actually. And there's lots and lots of papers, and some are reflected on this slide, around the very limited benefit we get for the investment that we put into all types of research, and that is not sustainable. And I think there could be many reasons for that. And I think the thing that's always concerned me is, as the system bends and flexes to accommodate these imperfect data sets, it makes it, I think, sometimes easier and easier to get things through that are maybe not of the quality that we need. So things like, you know, adaptive pathways, cancer drugs funds, all kinds of things that enable drugs to come through the system that may not be what the system needs, but they get through anyway. And I think as a consequence, patient, society, and health system and taxpayers don't often get the optimum benefit from that investment. So if we go to the next slide, please. And I think that this quite often is easily expressed in the context of the patient perspective, because in almost all cases, suppliers, whether they're academic suppliers of research or commercial, have got no clue what it is that patients want. And it's very rarely reflected in clinical trial design, but also the priorities that sort of underpin clinical trials, and, you know, in terms of the commercial decisions, the investor decisions versus the things that are important for patients. So ultimately, when we get to market with new product, it's very hard to express a value proposition in the context of what's important to patients. And actually, if you ask patients what they want, it may be very different to what you assumed they want, as is depicted on this nice cartoon. So if we go to the next slide, please. And for me, it's about this lack of understanding of benefit risks trade-offs, and really understanding what patients' perspectives are. And I think that our healthcare ecosystem needs to learn possibly from other industries, because Jeff Bezos at Amazon would not be the richest guy in the world at the moment if he didn't understand very clearly and scarily so the kind of needs of his customers and the desires of his customers and what they want. And I think our system needs to pivot and almost reverse engineer itself and be obsessed with gathering patient intelligence and feeding that back into the system to make better decisions about research priorities, stop-go decisions, and ultimately trying to shape at what comes through the system. Next slide, please. And this is where I think NICE come in and other HTA bodies. So you can see in the kind of chevrons there, which is the critical path within the UK health research system. It's long, there are many actors, many stakeholders, many vested interests, and they're largely working and thinking in silos. I think COVID has really highlighted the benefits of collaboration and the possibilities and the unifying around a common goal or common goals, but we haven't had that in the past so much, which is why I think we see all the downstream consequences, and these consequences are there not just for HTA, but also for industry, but particularly for patients. And my view is that NICE and HTA generally kind of sit in the middle of this ecosystem and have a unique ability and opportunity to connect demand and supply. And therefore, rather than just seeing HTA as a defined time point in a chaotic system, it should have the ability to stretch upstream and downstream and bring the different stakeholders together and play that almost honest broker collaborative role in bringing people together to really map out the kinds of things that we see now. And Prasad's presentation highlighted the great work that has been done in bringing different stakeholders around the table to unify around some really important common goals. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide, which is, NICE are perfectly placed to do this. And I think, at least in my opinion, they've been quietly evolving and getting ahead of the curve for many years. My personal view is they don't get the credit they deserve for the offer that they have to industry and the offer that they have to patient groups. And I can see some of the questions that have come in around how to get involved with NICE, but I think we should all rally around NICE and really see them at the epicenter of the ecosystem in which we work, because they have the unique ability and experience to connect up demand and supply in really sophisticated ways. And even now they've got a number of offerings for industry in the context of scientific advice, and many of my clients have participated in these services and have had massive benefit. There's the Office of Market Access as well, which I see very much as first base, and this ability to do knowledge transfer and to bring different stakeholders for the system round the table. And I think we don't often speak about the patient access, the patient involvement team, but they offer incredible advice to patients and industry about how to put patients at the center of HTA appraisal. So there's an abundance of early access and early engagement opportunities at NICE that could be, I think, transformational. And what I've always said throughout my career is it's important to make NICE particularly part of our solution and not part of our problem. And it's really encouraging to see, of all the things that haven't been done so well in COVID, that many things have been done well. And this collaboration, this new platform, these new ways of working, I think have massive potential. But I think that what we don't want to do is to get carried away. I think we've got to think that ultimately we work in a system, and that system relies on evidence inputs. And while we want to collaborate and finesse the system, on behalf of patients, we have to make sure that the research is of a very high standard, and that we design trials appropriately, and that the system is able to identify early and bring through the most important treatments that have the best evidence for patient benefit. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Eric. Well, we're not paying you to say all those things about NICE, but they come straight from the heart. I know that. And I was reminded the other day of the Price of Life documentary in 2009, where we, I think, both featured one of our first engagements around a specific technology. But thank you very much. Let's bring all the panelists together in view. And we've got some questions coming in through the Q&A. I thought the first one I should put to the group is one that very much feeds in from all of your presentations. And it says that I agree, this is the respondent, I agree that a clear shared common objective has been key to considerably shortening the innovation patient access pathway. However, a challenge, a concern, not least by a CEO of one of the biggest medical companies in the world at a recent ICOM annual conference, is that a post-COVID world will not have that clear shared common objective. So what does the panel think, what clear shared common objective post-COVID do you anticipate will stop decision makers from retreating back into their normal silos? I guess that's the concern of many, isn't it? That post-COVID we'll all go back to our ways of working before it. And the innovation patient access pathway extending back out to business as usual. So what is it, panel, that you think would still drive us to collaborate in the way that we've described today? So Krishna, perhaps you could go first.
Thank you very much, Minder. That's an excellent question. I think that from my perspective, we were previously in positions where we were actually responding to a particular responsibility. But the COVID-19 experience has shown that we can share the responsibility and we can achieve this by a much more rapid collaboration and a much quicker timeline, and that the shared objective will actually help us move forward even individual responsibilities. And I think that's the first lesson that we would want to take forward and facilitate this in my mind. The second is the question of having to keep the public and the patient engagement and the patient interest in the center of our work. Previously, I think when all the organizations were set up as they were given certain responsibilities, and as I alluded to earlier, I think the shared common objective now is becoming evident, and we should make all efforts to stop going back into those silos. I think that realization has occurred, and it is, whilst it occurred some time ago, the COVID-19 provided the biggest opportunity to make this work faster and work together. Carla very nicely in her presentation talked about the COVID-19 oversight group meeting every week. I expect that we would channel our energies in simulating that experience with other areas and move forward.
Okay, Carla, is there anything you would say? So because this is an emergency, isn't it? And so all hands on deck. But what do we think in the future when the seas are calmer?
Well, a couple of observations, and I think perhaps on that very last comment that the seas may be calmer, but they won't be calm. So as I pointed out in the beginning, this is a constantly evolving landscape, and it feels for all of us in it like it gets hotter and hotter and faster as the years pass by. And I don't think that's going to change. So as we talked about now, with all the work that's having to go on around the EU exit. So I think, first of all, there aren't going to be those calm. We're never, ever going to be back in a situation where there is calm. I think the other thing is perhaps a behavioural thing, and if people excuse me saying it, and colleagues in the room, that I think potentially previous to this, we all recognise the need to do this, but it just felt too hard to do. We just didn't think it was doable. Our paradigm has changed. We've now realised it is doable. And there is a way that we can collaborate, still retain our remits, back to what Krishna talked about, still retain our remits, but actually work in this way. But I think the question's got a very, very good edge to it, because it means we all have to be on our guard, because we're human after all, and that's the condition, isn't it? So I don't think I'll be honest, I don't think it's an absolute done deal. It'll just move forward from here. But we've learned how to do it, and it's like anything, it's a habit. We've formed a habit, and we just have to practicing now and keep that habit going.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're absolutely right, because we now speak a more common language, don't we? Even in the grouping on the Wednesday evening, and we see each other's culture differently, and we've learned to work with each other in ways that we might otherwise have never imagined. I can't really see why we would deconstruct it. But Eric, there's probably more to do, isn't there? Because your argument, it seems to me that if you think about rapid C19 and all the work the MHRA has done, is still quite reactive to the first start of starting to develop the evidence, isn't it? So the choice of what trials you do, the choice of what investigation you might want to employ, which patients you are pursuing, that still seems to be happening somewhere else. And of course, we had NIHR as part of our collaborators and still have. But to get under the skin of the primary investigators is also one for us to perhaps think about. And we're still quite reactive and not proactive in that respect. Maybe not as much as you would want us to be.
No, definitely not. I think we're very reactive. The system is reactive rather than proactive. But business as usual was allowed to flourish because of the rules in the system. All people did was they worked to the rules that they were given, whether it was a commercial company. They were just very good at working within the rules that they were given. If you're an academic researcher, you also work within the rules that you're given, which is apply for grant funding, get a publication or fund a PhD student, and that was sufficient. And I think for me, it's around how do we realign the rewards and incentives around common goals? Because if you want to herd cats, just move the food. And although it's not that simple, but it's about rewards and incentives. If we want behavior change, we have to put the right incentives, the right rewards, and the right signals in the system for people to behave differently. The system has to create something where people win. We don't want any losers in the system. They all have to win. But the incentives and the rewards need to be different. And I think that's where we have the most work to do. And ultimately, I think it's about having this laser sharp focus on what the market wants. Because there's too much waste in research. There's too many things that fail. There's too many grants that go out to research that isn't clinically relevant or clinically plausible. So the more that the system can define and clarify what it wants and what it needs and give a blueprint to a supplier and saying, this is what we need. If you can bring this to market the right way, we would be very happy.
And to be fair, I think on all of those that have worked in the COVID space, the trials that have been done and supported by our chief medical officer have turned out to be the successful one. The recovery trial, and there's some platforms that have been initiated by colleagues in central government and in the CMO office that have turned out to be really a proactive way of handling a situation. So we haven't discussed it today, and I don't want it unsaid that's been a great effort in itself.
Absolutely.
But we should learn from it.
Absolutely. But we often don't talk about things that, and failure is important, but there's always things that get through the system. It's about proportionality to make sure that we're investing research resources differently to make sure we get more COVID type wins.
Yeah. We're towards the end. There were a couple of questions around testing. We didn't discuss that at all, although Carla mentioned on a slide some of our work around diagnostic tests. And we can answer the questions specifically in the chat box, or if you would contact one of the NICE people you will have seen appear here at Carla directly. It's quite an easy email address, isn't it? carla.deakin@nice.org.uk. I don't think that's a secret. We will answer those questions for you. And I just see one last one coming in. Can I ask Eric how he proposes patients can be included more in the bench to bedside process? So if we make that the last question, then that would be great in your answer.
It's a great question. I think it's incumbent upon patient organizations to move from current types of advocacy to evidence-based advocacy, because I think they've always been asked, not always, but increasingly they're asked at the table. I think companies really grapple with how to be patient-centric and how to involve patients, but ultimately it's down to patient groups to understand how to do it and what to bring to the table. And I think in the same way that we're saying that, industry, we need to have evidence, patient groups need to move into evidence-based advocacy so we can take evidence to decision makers around their perspectives, their perceptions, and their values. And I think that's the biggest improvement that advocacy can make. And I don't think it will have the impact we need until it moves to an evidence basis.
Brilliant. Well, let's. Who could ever do better than that, Eric? And thank you very much, Krishna, again for your time. Apologies, we've run over a bit, and Carla as well for your very insightful presentation. Just a final slide. This is a shameless plug for Health Technology Assessment International Annual Meeting in or from Manchester next year. Not clear yet, but we welcome you all. The deadline for abstracts is next Thursday for posters and oral presentations. Please, please, please make your colleagues enthusiastic for that meeting. And thank you very much for dialing in today's live event. There will be more to come from NICE over the next months. And have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Wanda. Thank you all
Thank
for
you.
organizing it. It's been an excellent experience.